I just want to say it's a great pleasure to be here, and it's nice to get a real sense of what's gone into to the implementation of MARC-21 in Germany. And I appreciate having the invitation to be part of it all. So, what I'm going to talk about, I guess I'll do a couple of my own landscapes, but I'm afraid my landscapes all turn out to be rectangles. So you'll see as I go into this presentation that essentially I'm mapping entity relationship models here and showing how RDA relates both to MARC-21 as we know it currently and to the FRBR and FRAD models that were the underlying models for RDA, and one expects may in fact become underlying models for databases as we migrate to newer generations. Hopefully a little more smoothly than we just did here. So I'm just going to touch briefly, sort of give an overview of what it means to encode or RDA data in MARC-21 and how that can be used in various implementations. Mark Stewart is going to talk in a little more detail about the specifics of the mapping of RDA to MARC-21, but I'm just going to give a kind of high-level view here. I just want to say a couple of things, though, in general about the design of the RDA element set. And first and foremost, it was designed to be compatible with MARC-21. So the similarities between the element set you see outlined in RDA and and what you see as the element set in MARC-21 is not coincidental. It was a deliberate design feature to make RDA compatible with MARC-21. And the assumption behind that was that most libraries who will be creating RDA data are currently using ILSs that import and export data in MARC-21, and they may in fact store the data in if not in pure MARC-21, in a format that mirrors MARC-21. So that was a practical design consideration when we were looking at defining the element set for RDA. But we were also looking forward and aligning the data set with both the FRBR and the FRAD models, which have been developed by IFLA over the last 15 or 18 years, I suppose, at this point. And then there too, the assumption was that libraries will begin, and some in fact already have started, to migrate to a new generation of systems that use either relational or object-oriented or similar entity relationship database structures. And so the feeling was that in order for RDA to be able to move forward smoothly with that migration trend, that we needed to make sure we were aligned with what we considered to be well-established models that I think have hopefully a reasonable future ahead of them. So with those design features, effectively what we did was we positioned RDA between MARC-21 and the FRBR and FRAD models, and effectively acting as a mediator between the two. So RDA data can be encoded in MARC-21, and it can also be stored in databases that mirror the MARC-21 structure, that is, dividing records into bibliographic holdings and authority records. But the data can also be imported and exported to and from databases that are modeled on the FRBR FRAD models and structured in that way, so that you have records for works expressions, manifestations, items, person, family, corporate body, and then the other subject-related entities, concept, object, event, and place. So effectively, you can move RDA data back and forth between MARC-21 and databases that are structured around those models. The illustrations I'm going to use for this presentation are fairly simple ones. In fact, they perhaps oversimplify what's involved in that moving from one side of this slide to the other. But Mark Stewart is going to pick up and deal with some of the more complex issues involved with that kind of import-export. Because what happened, since we actually had not only these two as targets in our design, but also the ISBD element set was a third element set that we were trying to maintain compatibility with. So when you're trying to juggle three element sets, inevitably there are trade-offs. Mostly those manifest themselves as differences in degree of granularity with the target formats. In most cases, RDA data element set, in fact, is more granular than MARC, but in some cases, MARC is defined at a higher level of granularity. So those kinds of issues have to be dealt with, but they're not new to anyone involved in mappings and conversions. So. But as I say, what I'm going to show, I just happen to be illustrating a record that, for the most part, has one-to-one relationships between RDA and MARC-21, but I don't want to give you the false impression that everything is that way. So if we look, and I don't expect anybody to be able to read that, even from the front row, but I just want to, as I say, lay out the landscape here. And this is the first of two implementation scenarios that I'm going to run through briefly. And this is one where you are using MARC or RDA data in a database structure that mirrors the MARC-21 structure. What I'm going to focus on, in this structure you have the bibliographic record, which I've just outlined in blue there. Immediately hanging below that in the lower left of the slide is a holdings record. I'm not going to go into any detail in that. But I'm also going to look at a couple of the authority records that would be linked to the bibliographic record in this scenario. And one is the name title authority record that represents the work embodied in the manifestation that's described in the bibliographic record. And a second authority record is a name authority record for one of the persons linked to that work, associated with that work. So we'll look at those three records. I'll zoom in on those, and hopefully this should be a little more